Good evening, I'm Ben, and welcome to the show where you and I gather around this campfire to hear some of our fellow campers' scariest experiences. Whether you're a new or returning camper, I'm happy to have you. Tonight we're headed to the woods near Ashville, North Carolina, to hear Alyssa Thompson's story about her mysterious childhood friend, Miss Smith, and a strange silver necklace that would appear and reappear throughout her life. Before we begin, if you want to check out our camp's monthly bonus episodes, access ad-free episodes, and more, head over to patreon.com/doyouwannahearaghost-story. Now, without further ado, do you want to hear a ghost story? When I was little, I had an imaginary friend. At least that's what my mother called her. I'm not sure that's what she was. I guess I'll leave it up to you to decide. Her name was Miss Smith. She was a woman, maybe in her mid-40s if I had to guess, though we never talked about how old she was. I remember clearly how she always looked the same, wearing a neat blue dress that reached down to just below her knees, and her hair, which was beginning to gray, was always pinned up in a tidy bun. There was something timeless about her. She never changed. No matter how many times I saw her, she was always in her blue dress, carrying a brown bag that she never opened. It was as if she didn't even realize she had it. Most days, Miss Smith would wait for me near the edge of the woods behind my house. I'd tell my mother that I was going to play outside, and she'd say back her usual response, "Be home by dinner." This always confused me. How was I supposed to know when dinner was ready? I wasn't the one cooking. But somehow, no matter how long I seemed to spend with Miss Smith, I always made it home just in time. Our house bordered on a thick stretch of forest. My mother always warned me not to go too deep, but I felt safe with Miss Smith by my side. She'd be standing there every afternoon, waiting for me, right where my yard met the trees. I'd rush over and together we'd wander into the woods, taking a different path every time. Miss Smith was a great listener. I would tell her all about school, my friends, new toys, whatever came to mind, really. And she never seemed bored or disinterested. Though she didn't talk much herself, when she did, it was always something wise. She'd tell me to pay attention to my teachers, to treat my toys and everything with care, and to always be kind. You know, looking back on it, they really were simple things, but at the time they seemed profound. One of the last times I ever saw Miss Smith really stands out from the rest. We'd been walking for what felt like hours when we finally entered a clearing in the woods that I had never seen before, and the sight of it felt strange. The sunlight was pouring in, illuminating the leaves that blanketed the ground with golden hues. It should have been beautiful, but it all felt wrong. The woods around the clearing began seeming darker than usual, almost like a shadow surrounding a light. Miss Smith just stood in the center of the clearing, her dress somehow seeming brighter in the sunlight. I stood behind her and looked around silently. Then she turned to me and said, "I have something for you." She reached into her brown bag, acknowledging it for the first time, and pulled out a silver necklace. It shimmered in the sunlight, catching my eye immediately. I remember thinking how delicate and beautiful it was, and how weird it was to see something like this out in the middle of the woods. "It's not my birthday," I said, confused why she was giving me a gift. Miss Smith smiled, but didn't respond. She draped the necklace around my neck. The chain was a bit long, and it was really heavy. We didn't talk much after that. Miss Smith was unusually quiet on our walk home, only making occasional comments about how I needed to get home for dinner. When we reached the edge of the woods, I turned to say goodbye to her like I always did, and she just stood there, watching me. I waved from the porch, but she didn't wave back. When I went inside, my mother was busy in the kitchen, finishing up dinner. She was putting soup into bowls when she glanced back at me. "Did you have fun?" "Yeah, I went for a walk with Miss Smith again," I answered. My mother just hummed an acknowledgement. She had long accepted my stories of Miss Smith, but never really indulged me when I brought her up. She gave me this necklace, pulling the chain from under my shirt to show her. This got her attention. She turned, her eyes narrowed in on the necklace. She stepped closer to grab it. She quickly yanked her hand away from it. "Alyssa, it's burning," she said, turning me around and taking it off my neck. She grabbed the necklace and threw it on to the counter. It wasn't hot around my neck. But my mother insisted, her voice now sharper. "Don't touch it." She handed me a bowl of soup. "Take this to the table, please." We ate dinner in silence, but I couldn't stop thinking about the necklace. When I was returning my empty bowl to the kitchen, I glanced up at the counter, but the necklace was gone. "Mom, the necklace, where'd it go?" I said. "What necklace, Alyssa?" my mother responded. "The necklace Miss Smith gave me. You took it off right before dinner." "Alyssa, you know I love your imagination, but sometimes I think it gets the better of you," my mother said to me. I didn't know what to say. I just went to bed. The next afternoon, I did what I always did. I told my mother I was going outside and ran to the edge of the woods, expecting to see Miss Smith standing there like usual. But she wasn't. I called out her name. "Miss Smith? Miss Smith? Miss Smith, where are you?" But she never answered. Even more confused now, I started walking into the woods, figuring that maybe she was around somewhere. I wandered for what felt like years, calling her name repeatedly. "Miss Smith? Miss Smith, please! Miss Smith, I lost your necklace! Miss Smith!" But there was no responses, no blue dress, no smiles. And the woods felt different without her, just cold and dark. It was around now when I realized I was lost. I stood still, looking around trying to figure out how to get back home, but nothing looked familiar. Of all the paths me and Miss Smith ever took, this was not one of them. Panic began to set in as I realized that I was alone, in the woods with no idea how to get home. Then I heard it. A faint snap of a twig. I looked up and for a split second, I saw a flash of a blue dress dart right behind a tree. "Miss Smith! Miss Smith, please! Please help!" I called out, running quickly towards the tree, but every time I got close, I would see her duck behind another tree further ahead. I kept running. "Miss Smith! Miss Smith, please wait up, I have to get home! Miss Smith, please!" My legs ached, but I couldn't stop running. I needed to catch up to her. She was the only one I knew who could help get me home. As the sun was beginning to set, I saw my house, barely visible through the trees. Relief washed over me as I sprinted towards the back porch. I paused momentarily to look back at the woods, but there was no sign of Miss Smith. "Alyssa! Where have you been?" My mother's voice rang out from the house. "Mom, I couldn't find Miss Smith. I got lost." My mother frowned as she embraced me. "Honey, you can't keep going into the woods. And I think it's time we have a talk about your friend. You're getting a little old for imaginary friends, don't you think?" I just shook my head in acknowledgement. Years passed. I grew up, moved out, went to college, and eventually forgot all about my imaginary friend, Miss Smith. Or at least that's what I thought. About a year ago, my mom brought me a box of some of my old things from her house. She said she was trying to downsize. Rummaging through the box, I found old toys, old school projects, and photos. But at the bottom of the box, something caught my eye. Something shiny. I reached in and pulled it out. It was the silver necklace Miss Smith had given me all those years ago. I turned it over in my hand, examining it. It looked exactly as I remembered. But the longer I held it, I felt it getting warmer and warmer in my hand. Eventually so hot that I dropped it in the box. Sitting back down, I began remembering my mother's encounter with the necklace. When I sat up to grab it out of the box, it was gone. Before sending you this email, I spoke with my mother at great lengths. She remembers all about my stories with Miss Smith. But even upon reminding her, she doesn't remember a single thing about the day I brought the necklace home. Thank you, Alyssa, for allowing me to share your story. There are so many stories sent in where parents and kids remember things differently. However, these stories rarely accompany any sort of tangible evidence. Even though you've lost yours, it typically is just a he said, she said sort of scenario. Even more, your story reminds me of folk legends surrounding the Fae. It makes me wonder if Miss Smith was really just an imaginary friend, or something else. And it makes me wonder what she wanted, and why she gave you that necklace. Maybe there are some other campers here tonight who are more schooled in the Fae legends, and they can offer their opinions. There are no new show announcements this week. I'm still working towards 2 stories an episode, but I haven't gotten to where I think I can do it consistently yet. So for now, it will still just be 1 story a show. I have no new patron shoutouts, but if you would like one and access to bonus episodes, check out patreon.com/doyouwannahearaghost-story. I will leave you here for the night. I am glad to have you all as campers on this journey. Please keep sharing the show with anyone you think might like these stories, or someone you're just trying to scare. If you're enjoying the show, please go ahead and leave a review. I would love to hear from you. If you have a story, send it to doyouwannahearaghost-story@gmail.com. Until next time.